Section 1. Opening hooks. The room went silent the moment the plate slipped from the waiter's hands. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a soft clatter as bread rolls scattered across the polished restaurant floor. But everyone felt it because the man who dropped the plate didn't even try to save it. He was staring at the little boy in the corner booth, frozen, like he'd been caught stealing something far more valuable than food. The manager's voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" The waiter swallowed hard. His name tag read Evan, though most people never bothered to look that closely. He was in his early 30s, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired in the way only single parents' eyes ever were. He glanced at the boy again, a small, thin child with wide eyes and hands folded tightly in his lap. The boy didn't speak. He never did. I was just... Evan started, then stopped. He knew excuses didn't work here. "You gave him food," the manager snapped, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Without paying. Without permission." A few diners shifted uncomfortably. Others pretended not to notice. This was a 5-star restaurant in downtown Manhattan. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, meals that cost more than Evan made in a day. Compassion didn't usually survive long in places like this. The boy's father stood up slowly, panic etched across his face. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, hands raised. "My son can't speak. He was hungry. I told him we'd wait." The boy tugged on his father's sleeve, shaking his head, his eyes pleading. He didn't want trouble. He never wanted trouble. But the manager wasn't listening. "You're fired," he said, pointing at Evan. "Effective immediately. We don't run a charity." Evan nodded once. No argument. No anger. Just quiet acceptance. He bent down, gathering the fallen bread rolls with shaking hands, even though he knew it didn't matter anymore. That was when the woman at table 12 stood up. She had been sitting there the entire time, unnoticed, undisturbed. Dressed simply, no flashy jewelry, no need to prove anything. Most of the staff didn't recognize her. Why would they? Billionaires rarely looked the part in public. She walked toward them slowly, heels clicking softly against the floor. Every step seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The manager turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Ma'am, we're handling an internal issue." "No," she interrupted gently. "You're not." She looked past him, kneeling slightly, so she was eye level with the boy. Her expression softened instantly. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her, then lifted one hand and tapped twice against his chest. A simple gesture. Practiced. Familiar. The woman's breath caught. She straightened slowly, her composure wavering for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. She turned to Evan, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "You gave him food," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Evan replied quietly. "I was going to pay for it myself after my shift." The manager scoffed. "That's not the point." She finally looked at the manager. "You're right," she said calmly. "It's not." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black card, placing it on the table nearest them. A few nearby diners leaned closer, curiosity overcoming politeness. "My son hasn't spoken a word since he was 3, she continued, her voice steady but edged with something sharper now. "Doctors said trauma.
Time.
Patience." She paused. They were wrong. The room felt smaller. She gestured toward the boy. "He hasn't eaten properly in days. When he doesn't eat, he doesn't cope. When he doesn't cope, he shuts down completely." Evan's eyes widened slightly. "You didn't just give him food," she said, looking directly at Evan. "You gave him dignity." The manager laughed nervously. "Ma'am, with all due respect, rules are rules. He stole from the restaurant." She smiled then, but it wasn't kind. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. The manager hesitated. "I know, but..." She picked up the card and turned it so the light caught the embossed name. A few gasps rippled through the room. "I'm Claire Whitmore," she said, CEO of Whitmore Hospitality Group. The silence that followed was deafening. This restaurant, she continued, her voice ice-cold now, is owned by my company. The manager's face drained of color. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that everyone leaned in to hear. And that man you just fired, she said, pointing at Evan. He's the only one in this room who did the right thing. She turned to Evan again, her expression softening. Section 1 ends here, but the story was just beginning, because what she said next would change Evan's life, the boy's future, and the fate of everyone who thought kindness was a fireable offense. No one spoke. Not the manager. Not the diners. Not even the clinking glasses or humming air vents dared to make a sound. The name Claire Whitmore hung in the air like a verdict that had already been decided. The manager's mouth opened, then closed again. I didn't know, he finally stammered, his confident posture collapsing inward. If I had known. That, Claire said sharply, is exactly the problem. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority radiated from her in a way money alone could never buy. It came from certainty. She turned to the dining room, her gaze sweeping across the faces, pretending not to watch. How many of you saw this man feed a hungry child? She asked. A few hands rose hesitantly. Others nodded. And how many of you thought, she continued, that kindness deserved punishment? No one answered. Claire crouched again in front of the mute boy. This time, she didn't ask him to speak. She extended her palm, slow and open, the way therapists had taught her years ago. The boy studied her carefully. Then, after a long moment, he placed a small hand in hers. The room exhaled. His father's eyes filled instantly. He doesn't do that, he whispered. He doesn't trust strangers. Claire smiled gently. He's not afraid of people who listen. She stood and turned back to Evan. What's your full name? Evan Miller, he replied. Sir, ma'am, I mean... She waved it off. Single father? Evan hesitated, then nodded. Yes. My daughter's 8. Her mom passed 2 years ago. Something flickered across Claire's face. Recognition, not pity. Then you know, she said quietly. You know what it's like to make impossible choices. She turned back to the manager. You fired him for breaking policy, she said. Let's talk about policy. The manager straightened slightly, clinging to procedure like a life raft. Company rules are clear. No complimentary food without authorization. Theft prevention. Wrong, Claire interrupted. Our policy allows staff discretion in cases of medical need or child welfare. The manager blinked. It does? Yes, Claire said flatly. You would know that if you'd completed the last 2 ethics training modules. A murmur rippled through the room. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, publicly humiliating an employee violates Section 4.3 of our conduct code. The manager swallowed hard. Ms. Whitmore, please, this is a misunderstanding. No, she said again. This is a pattern. She pulled her phone from her purse and tapped the screen. Over the past 6 months, customer complaints about this location have doubled. Employee turnover? 42%. The manager's knees looked like they might buckle. Claire turned to the staff standing frozen near the kitchen doors. Who here has been threatened with termination for showing compassion? One server raised her hand. Then another. A third. Evans stared at them, stunned. Claire nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. She turned back to the manager one final time. Effective immediately, she said, you are relieved of your duties. The words landed heavy and final. Security appeared almost instantly, summoned without anyone noticing. The manager tried to protest, but it was over before it began. As he was escorted out, Claire addressed the room. This restaurant will remain open tonight, she said, but under new leadership. She gestured toward Evan. A ripple of confusion spread. Evan Miller, she said, fed my son when no one else noticed he was struggling. That tells me everything I need to know. Evan shook his head quickly. Ms. Whitmore, I appreciate it, but I'm just a waiter. She held up a hand. You're a father. You're observant. And you lead with empathy. She turned to the staff. Those are the qualities I look for in management. The room erupted into whispers. I'm not saying this is permanent, Claire added, meeting Evan's eyes. But tonight, you're acting floor manager. Evan's breath caught. Tonight? Yes, she said. And tomorrow, we talk about what comes next. The mute boy tugged on his father's sleeve, then pointed at Evan. He tapped his chest once, then pointed to Evan again. The gesture was unmistakable. You're saying thank you, Claire said softly. The boy nodded. For the first time since his diagnosis, a faint sound escaped his lips. Not a word, not even a syllable, but something closer to breath shaped into meaning. Evan felt his throat tighten. Claire watched closely, her eyes shining. This, she said quietly, is why kindness is never against policy. Section 2 closed with the staff slowly returning to motion, the restaurant breathing again. But beneath the calm, something profound had shifted. Because what Claire planned next would reach far beyond this dining room, and Evan had no idea how much his life was about to change. The first thing Evan noticed was the way the staff looked at him now. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. With relief. It happened in small ways at first. A server quietly asking if he wanted her to cover table 9. A busboy waiting for his nod before clearing a plate. People who had spent months bracing themselves suddenly exhaled, as if the air in the restaurant had finally changed. Evan felt it too, and it terrified him. 10 minutes ago, he had been unemployed. Now, the weight of an entire dining room rested on his shoulders. Floor manager, he murmured again, half expecting someone to laugh and say it had all been a mistake. But no one did. Across the room, Claire sat beside her son, Leo, watching Evan with the sharp, unreadable focus of someone who built empires for a living. She wasn't smiling. She was observing. That made Evan more nervous than any angry manager ever had. He straightened his apron and forced himself to move. Table 4 needed refills. Table 7 had been waiting too long for dessert menus. A young server near the kitchen looked close to tears, hands shaking as she balanced a tray. Evan stepped in without thinking. I've got this, he said gently, lifting half the plates. You take a breath. The server blinked. Thank you, she whispered, like it was something forbidden. The restaurant began to flow. Not perfectly, but humanly. Claire noticed how Evan never barked orders. He asked questions instead. He remembered names. He apologized when something went wrong, even if it wasn't his fault. Most of all, he watched the guests, especially Leo. The boy sat quietly, shoulders hunched, eyes darting whenever someone walked past. Evan made sure servers approached slowly, from the front, never from behind. He instructed the kitchen to plate Leo's food simply. Nothing touching, nothing overwhelming. No one argued. By the time the main course ended, Leo had eaten more than he had in weeks. Claire stared at her son's plate, her fingers trembling slightly as she folded her napkin. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together until that moment. She stood and approached Evan. Walk with me, she said. They stopped near the wine display, out of earshot. You've done this before, Claire said. Not a question. Evan shook his head. Not like this. No, she agreed. But you've carried responsibility that didn't come with authority. Evan looked down. When my wife died, people kept telling me how strong I was. I didn't feel strong. I felt necessary. Claire's eyes flickered. That's exactly it. She paused. Why didn't you hesitate? He frowned. About the food? Yes. Evan took a breath. Because when adults argue about rules, kids learn they don't matter. The words hit her harder than she expected. Claire turned away briefly, composing herself. My husband used to say something similar, she said quietly. He believed systems should bend for people, not the other way around. Evan didn't respond. He sensed this was something fragile. They returned to the dining room together. As closing time approached, the energy shifted again. Staff gathered plates with less tension. Laughter escaped from the kitchen, real laughter, not nervous noise. Then Leo did something unexpected. He stood up. Claire froze. Leo? He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Evan. The boy took one hesitant step. Then another. Every movement was deliberate, like crossing an invisible line. Evan noticed him too late. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down so he wasn't towering over him. "You okay?" Leo stared at him, hands clenched into fists. His chest rose and fell too fast. Claire rushed forward, panic flashing across her face. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to." Leo shook his head. He lifted his hands and formed an awkward, halting gesture. Not sign language exactly, but something close. Something practiced in private. Evan watched carefully. "You want more?" he guessed gently. Leo shook his head again, frustration flickering across his face. He pressed his hand against his chest, then pointed at Evan. The room held its breath. Evan swallowed. "Me?" Leo nodded once. Claire's heart pounded. "He's trying," she whispered, tears threatening. "He hasn't tried in so long." Evan didn't rush him. He didn't fill the silence. He waited. Leo opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His eyes filled with tears, and his body tensed like he was bracing for failure. Evan placed a hand over his own chest. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You don't owe anyone words." Leo's lips trembled. Then, barely audible, air shaped itself into sound. "Teach tank." The word cracked in half as it left his mouth. But it was there. Claire covered her mouth, a sob breaking free despite every attempt to stay composed. Evan's vision blurred. He nodded slowly, voice thick. "You're welcome, Leo." The boy exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for years. No one clapped. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Because everyone in that room understood something had changed, not just for Leo, not just for Evan, but for a place that had once believed rules mattered more than people. Section 3 ended there, but the consequences of that single word were only beginning to unfold. Section 4. Opening hooks. The next morning, Evan woke up before his alarm. That alone felt strange. Usually, mornings were a blur of rushing, packing lunches, coaxing his daughter out of bed, calculating which bill could wait another week. But today, there was a quiet heaviness in his chest, the kind that came from knowing something had shifted and not yet knowing the cost. His phone buzzed. A single message. "Claire Whitmore, 8 a.m. boardroom. Please don't be late." Evan stared at the screen for a long moment. Boardroom. He almost laughed. By 7:45, he stood in the glass tower downtown, wearing the only suit he owned, a little too tight, a little too worn. The receptionist smiled politely, but when she saw the meeting name, her posture changed. "Top floor," she said. "They're waiting." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, Evan stepped into a room that looked nothing like the restaurant. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A long polished table. Men and women in tailored suits speaking in hushed, confident tones. And at the head of it all, Claire. She stood when she saw him. "Good morning, Evan." Every conversation stopped. "This," Claire said to the room, "is the man I told you about." Eyes turned. Appraisals were made in seconds. Evan's palms sweated. "Yesterday," Claire continued, "we witnessed a failure of leadership. And an unexpected example of it." She gestured for Evan to sit beside her. "I'm not qualified for this," Evan whispered. She met his gaze calmly. "Neither was I the first time I walked into a room like this." The meeting began. Reports were presented. Numbers discussed. Policies dissected. Evan understood almost none of it. But then Claire turned to him. "Tell them what you saw last night," she said. Evan hesitated. 30 executives waited. "I saw a hungry child," he said finally. "And a system more afraid of losing money than losing its humanity." Silence. One board member frowned. "With respect, compassion doesn't scale." Evan looked at him. "Neither does cruelty. But it spreads faster." Claire smiled slightly. She stood. "Our company prides itself on luxury. But luxury without dignity is just decoration." She clicked a remote. Screens lit up, employee turnover rates, viral clips from the restaurant, customer reviews flooding in overnight. "Kindness," she said, "just became our most valuable asset." She turned back to Evan. "Which is why I'm creating a new role." Murmurs filled the room. Director of Guest and Employee Experience, Claire announced. Starting today. Evan's breath caught. That's not possible, someone objected. It is, Claire replied. Because I'm the CEO. She faced Evan. The position comes with training, a salary triple what you made before, and full childcare support. Evan's hands shook. My daughter. Already enrolled in after-school care, Claire said. Paid for. He couldn't speak. But Claire wasn't finished. She gestured toward the door. Leo stepped in, holding a tablet. The board members stiffened. Leo walked slowly to the front of the room. He didn't look at the executives. He looked at Evan. Claire knelt beside him. Tell them why he matters. Leo raised the tablet. On the screen were words, typed carefully. He saw me. A pause. Then Leo tapped again. When people see me, I am not afraid. No one breathed. Claire stood, her voice steady but fierce. That is the future of this company. She turned to Evan. Are you willing to help me build it? Evan swallowed hard, thinking of his daughter, of the nights he'd felt invisible himself. Yes, he said. If it helps someone feel seen. The meeting ended differently than it began. Not with handshakes, but with purpose. As Evan and Claire walked out, Leo reached for Evan's hand. And for the first time, Evan realized this wasn't just a promotion. It was a responsibility. Section 4 closed with sunlight flooding the hallway, because the hardest part wasn't what Evan had just gained, but whether he could live up to the trust placed in him. 6 months later, Evan still flinched every time he walked into a boardroom. Not because he felt out of place anymore, but because he remembered the night everything changed. A dropped plate. A hungry child. A decision that could have cost him his job and instead gave him a calling. The company looked different now. Not just on paper. Though profits were up, turnover was down, and customer loyalty had reached record highs, but in the small, human moments Evan noticed everywhere he went. A server kneeling to speak to a child at eye level. A manager quietly comping a meal without fear. A break room where laughter had replaced tension. Kindness had become policy. And at the center of it all stood Claire Whitmore, watching with the same sharp focus she'd used the night she stood up in that restaurant. Evan adjusted his tie and glanced at his phone. Leo, I practiced today. A smile tugged at his lips. Leo spoke more now, not easily, not fluently, but bravely. Each word was a victory earned the hard way. Therapy still mattered. Structure still mattered. But what mattered most was trust. And Evan had become part of that trust. That afternoon, the company hosted a press event at the original restaurant. Cameras lined the walls. Executives whispered. Staff stood straighter than usual. Evan hated the attention. Claire didn't. She stepped to the podium. 6 months ago, this company learned a lesson the hard way, she said. We learned that rules without empathy fail the very people they're meant to protect. She gestured toward Evan. This man reminded us of that. Applause filled the room. Evan shifted uncomfortably. Claire raised a hand. But this isn't about him. She nodded toward the front row. Leo stood. The room fell silent instantly. Claire placed a hand on her son's shoulder. Tell them what you told me. Leo swallowed. His fingers twitched, but he didn't look away. Io was hungry, he said slowly. Each word deliberate. He gave me food. He waited. Tears filled more than one pair of eyes. When people wait, Leo continued, I can talk. The applause that followed was different. Softer. Reverent. After the event, Evan stepped outside for air. The city buzzed around him. Cars, voices, life moving fast. Claire joined him. You changed everything, she said quietly. Evan shook his head. I just did what felt right. She smiled. That's what scares systems the most. They stood in silence for a moment. My daughter starts middle school next year, Evan said suddenly. She told her class her dad helps people for a living. Claire laughed softly. She's not wrong. Leo stepped outside then, holding a small folded paper. He handed it to Evan. Inside was a drawing, 3 figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small. Above them, in uneven letters, were 3 words. Thank you for waiting. Evan felt his throat close. Somewhere inside the restaurant, a bell rang. Dinner service was about to begin. Evan folded the paper carefully and placed it in his pocket. He looked back at the doors, at the place where his life had once nearly fallen apart and instead had come together. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness don't just change a moment. They change the rules. The end.